Hey everybody, it's Matt Powers. I'm here in the greenhouse at Baker Creek. Some harvesting going on. We got some giant turnips here. Actually, wait, this is not a turnip. Oh wait, is that a turnip? I think that's a turnip. Anyway, they're so big. We got daikon radishes in there. We got white top, purple top Milan turnips. That's what that one is. And they're just huge, massive. So that's what all that is there over there. So today we're talking about the 8 most common gardening mistakes. And they're usually things that happen in our first year gardening we learn from, but sometimes it takes us a few years to figure out what's going on. So I just wanted to share what they are so that we can realize if we're making those mistakes, right? All right, so number 1, we placed our garden in the wrong spot. You know the story, right? We put our gardens where the septic drainage field is. We put it where the house shades it every morning or afternoon. You put the garden where the dog likes to dig, or you know what I mean, way too far from the house, so the deer eat it all. All these different mistakes when we place the garden come into play. We want to be able to have the sun reach us as much as possible. And if you're in an area like where I used to live, you want to actually mitigate that out of some shade, right? So it really depends on where you are and your climate and all that. So garden placement. You put it in the wrong place. That happens all the time. And then the next year you got to move the garden. I got to do it again, and that whole thing. Hopefully when we're expanding every year instead of just shuffling, right? All right, number 2, you added too much manure, or the manure was too hot. It wasn't broken down enough. So what happened was you ended up burning your plants, or they just grew forever and turned bright green and nothing else happened. There wasn't any fruit. You had tons and tons of growth. And that's because it was nitrates. Like if you just put chicken manure down that wasn't decomposed, it was just nitrates it was putting out. And so it burned things, caused things to just grow vegetatively, not reproductively, which is ammonium, which is a different form of nitrogen that is a fungi and bacterial waste when pH is below 7. So important to realize, we gotta let our compost and our manures fully decompose. They need to be cool. If we're using it hot, we need to understand that we will be burning things. And people do use that. People use it hot to kill the weeds back and to prepare an area for spring. But they time it. They have several months of time where that's happening. Okay, so unfinished compost is similar, but it doesn't give you what you want in that way. But it can actually pass on pathogens and undesirable things, so you could be spreading your plant diseases or parasitic eggs or something like that, and that's not good either. Okay, and then over or under watering. One of the most important things I tell people when they water my gardens, and I've left people in charge of my gardens at different times, and I learned you have to explain to them that they have to touch the soil, not just surface. They have to dig their hands into the soil, and if it's wet just the top inch, then the roots are not getting wet, and because it'll just dry off. The dryness of the air and the dryness of the ground below it, because it's all dry below that watering 1 inch, it'll all just soak out, not soak out, it'll just dry out the water. So we really have to make sure that we water to where the soil is actually getting wet. A lot of people water, it looks wet, and they're like, I'm done. No, you got to touch that soil. The same thing goes with the opposite. We can overwater. Your plants need air in the soil. They need those little interstitial spaces to get that air. Nitrogen fixation only occurs when they're pulling nitrogen out of the air in the pockets of the soil. They're not like tunneling up to pull air out of the sky. No, it's air in the soils. Okay, and air is constantly diffusing into the ground and coming out. The surface of the air of the earth is breathing. Okay, so we have to make sure that we don't overwater, because when we overwater, we suffocate the plants. We make it so that they don't have any air. It becomes anaerobic, and the plants get sick and they can die. And I know that there are other examples. People in Korean farming always say, oh, we can work with anaerobes, and they're working with riparian species that can deal with anaerobic conditions. Not necessarily that they thrive in them, that they can live there, like rice. Rice can go in an anaerobic condition. It can be fermenting and releasing methane and all this awful stuff. And people cite that as, I can do it. But the reality is, rice prefers to be an aerobic, oxygen-rich, an aerobic context. And we know this because of the work of Masanobu Fukuoka, the natural farmer. He had the highest yields, matching the highest yields as all the people in Japan on his land, and he was doing rice, and he was only flooding his fields for a week or two. And he was not keeping it constantly wet, where it became anaerobic, released methane, and stank like, ugh, you don't even want to know. And he was getting more grains per rice head. The roots of his rice plants were white. They weren't black. They weren't rotting. It's the way that it should be. So aerobic, we want air in the soil. This is why we have to broad fork our soils to loosen it up, to make sure that there's air, and then this is why we don't drive large machines all over our fields, because it compacts the soil. So yeah, very important. We tried to fix the soils with products instead of life and organic matter. A lot of people think that they can buy a garden. You can't actually buy a garden. You can't actually go to a store and buy the elements that will make an amazing garden. That can only come from you doing the work, from you pairing with your actual local biome. You're never going to find something store-bought that's going to be superior. That's just the way nature works. And that's a good thing too, because you can always do better on your own. All right, overplanting and overextending. They're similar when we overplant. And that's also depends on our system, right? We've seen, Jean-Martin Frotier and Curtis Stone, they'll, instead of 6 inches between plants, they'll put like an inch or 2. And they'll get great yields because the soil is so good. So if our soil's good, we can go closer together. But in general, one of the first things that we do is we overplant. And then we don't think when we first get into gardening, because it all looks good. It all looks right. And so we're like, who do I kill? I don't know. I don't want to kill anyone. And so you don't do anything, and you end up with lower quality produce because they're competed for nutrients. And it's because we plant in monoculture when we start off, right? We don't mix things up because we don't think that way initially, usually. And so we end up with, the carrots pulling all those nutrients that supply carrots with nutrients out of the soil in that area. Then you have to rotate. Instead of mixing in a polyculture, using compost tea, and having the living soil there so that you wouldn't have to worry about that sort of thing. Okay, overextending. Yeah, we tend to do too much. We tend to take on. We tend to think that we have to do everything the meticulous, this is the way it says in the book kind of way, and we end up burning ourselves out, and then we skip a few days in the garden, and then it becomes overwhelming, and then doesn't produce what we want. And it's really important that we plan correctly. That's why I have entire courses around planning our garden. Okay, tilling. Tilling makes more weeds, and so when we rototill a patch and we're starting out, it feels great because it looks like we're doing something, and we just turn it all brown or black like instantly from the lawn. It looks like we did something, but it tends to be overkill is the problem. Removing the sod, I totally understand that. Of course, yeah, we gotta you gotta actually have annuals touch the soil. I get that, but when we till and we're going deep, when we're mixing it all up, it's similar to double digging. Don't do double digging. Save your back and save your soil. Because what happens is you're chopping up all the soil life and the fungi hyphae, and you're making it bacterial dominant, because that's the only thing that's whole and still operating easily. And so you end up focusing on bacterial, which means the output from that, the product, is nitrates. So what happens is you get weeds. So it's much better to shallow, light tillage. So we're taking off that sod, we're tilling the top 2 inches. It's a lot easier on your back. It's not crazy on the soil. If you've got shallow soils, it still works great. You're not bringing up that subsoil, which your plants do not like. Your plants do not like subsoils. The reason they're down there and the topsoil's up here, because nature decided it should be that way. And when we mix it all up and perfectly mixing it up, we end up with this like uniform mess. And so the plants are like, okay, the roots or the nutrients are all mixed up, and so they don't know where to go, and they're trying to reorganize everything, and everything's trying to resettle and reorganize, and that ends up ending as compaction, because the loaminess you create with a rototiller is an illusion. It's just you creating aeration by chopping it up and flipping it. But you didn't do anything, you know? You didn't actually create structure, because structure is created by fungi. When arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi pulls the sugars from the plant that they're partnering with in the rhizosphere, in the root zone, they're actually turning that into the structure of the soil so that you can have those interstitial spaces for air. That's why it's so critical. All right, number 7, failing to prep for wildlife. If we build our gardens too far away, like I originally said, if you build it too far away from your house, the wildlife are like, they never come here. And they just move on in. They're just there, they're just munching away. And it's kind of like you built a garden for them, right? Because it's over there in their area. If it's in an area you frequent, they don't usually attack it as much, okay? And I'm talking about deer really, not about the underground, subterranean creatures. So if we want to keep away pests like deer from eating our stuff, we have to plant it closer to the house or have layers. You have bait crops. You have crops for the actual wildlife ringing your system. So they approach your system and they start eating. And they don't need to go further into your system because there's delicious stuff to eat right here. Why do I need to go further? And if you design your system on contour like with swales, I think, and I've seen this, and I can't verify it everywhere because I haven't discussed this enough, but maybe you guys can be the answers to this right now. I've seen that deer do not like stepping onto flat ground when they're on a hill. So what do I mean by that? My system, the swales are perfectly flat. So the paths are like walking, along the escalators in an airport. It feels unnaturally flat. So you're walking along this hill, and then you step on the path, and it's flat, and then you're going through this tall corridor, because the path is low, and then the beds are higher, and then I have tall plants, like 20-foot tall, like Peruvian corn plants, right? And then I've got like 10, 12-foot tall giant amaranth. So it feels like you're in this like corridor, and everything's flat and really tall, and you feel like you can't see anything. And deer, if you know deer, they want to be able to see everything. So they're always at the tops of the hills, but they're always doing this thing and looking around. So we can, and then, all right, let's take it out of the further than deer. What about if you're dealing with bird pressure? Have you looked into this whole kestrel hawks and owl boxes thing? Well, the cool thing about this is you can actually look at the flight path of your garden. If your garden allows a hawk to sweep down and pluck things like little birds that are coming to eat your seeds, you will see much less birds. So if you clear those tree branches to allow those predator birds clearance to come down and pluck those little birds that are messing with your system, you can actually control them quite well. And this is placement. This is also, preparing for wildlife. It's all kind of mixed together, right? But yeah, and then polycultures really trick the ground critters. When you mix it all up, the thing they love is when you put your potatoes in a row. Yeah, they love that. Because they're like, today's the day, the potatoes are ready. And they go out and they're like, let's run down the row. And they go down the row and then they eat almost everything or hit everything. So your entire beautiful crop of potatoes has been slammed, boom, 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 in a row, and all of it devastated. So yeah, avoid that by mixing your plants up and then mixing preventative plants, stinkier plants in there too. So like horseradish in there too would help. So now the last one, number 8. What do you guys think it is? All right, planting too late or too early. And this actually is classic. This goes back to like farmers way back in the day have always complained about early frosts or early frosts or late frosts. And this is the whole dilemma. Do we plant now or do we wait? You know? And so this always is the debate, and we end up in a situation where we either plant too early or we plant too late, and we lose our harvest to frosts either at the beginning of our season or at the end of our season. And we still always do this. I don't know if you do this. I still always do this. I always put stuff out early. I do test batches stuff because I'm afraid, I'm going to lose it, right? And so I always do test batches. And then you want to save seed from the plants that survive any frost that you get. Those are the plants that you're planting out next year as early as you can, right? Because then you're adapting to the actual system and using that event as an experiment, as a refiner for your seeds. All right, guys. Thank you so much for dropping in. I really appreciate it. I love being here, in the greenhouse and talking to you guys about plants, about growing, about adaptation, about being regenerative. And I just want to thank you guys, and I hope that you have a wonderful Monday night and that you get growing, all right? So keep on growing.